Hello again, guys, welcome back. This is Comic Kid here again, and today we are looking at some of the best Batman stories out there. Now, this is my personal list, like I kind of always do. It's not like, I guess, what everyone else would consider to be some of the best Batman stories. So I tried to get a good mix of the two, and there are a few on here that I like less than others, but you know, a lot of other people still really like them, so I still wanted to highlight those. But yeah, it is another Batman themed day, so we're gonna just jump right in then. First up, we have none other than Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. Now, for a lot of people, this is like the ultimate, definitive Batman story. Essentially, you have an older Bruce Wayne who is forced to come out of retirement after things in Gotham just get so bad that it can no longer handle being without a Batman. And what I appreciate about this book is it is one of the first to kind of modernize Batman and just really make him into like the darker, gritty character that he is. It really pulled him away from kind of like the Adam West type stuff that had bled into the comics. And so I do appreciate that about this book. That said, I'm not the biggest fan of Miller's art style, and I do feel as though there are stronger Batman stories out there personally, but a lot of people will probably tell you otherwise. So many people consider this to be one of the best Batman, as well as like the best comic books ever made. Like between DC, Marvel, indie stuff, so many people will tell you that this is the best comic book ever made. It's such an iconic story that it directly inspired Ben Affleck's Batman and kind of like his arc in Batman v Superman. But even if you don't like the movie, there is still a lot to appreciate about the book. And if you do like the movie, then you're probably gonna like the book as well. And I want to stress that I don't dislike the book by any means, but I do feel as though there are some stronger Batman stories. I feel as though the reason people hold this one in such high regard is it was one of the first to kind of put this really dark, gritty take on Batman. Now, next up is gonna be Batman Under the Red Hood. Now, this one is by Judd Winnick, and it was the one that brought Jason Todd back to the land of the living as Red Hood. Now, aside from being like a very important chapter in Batman's life, it is one of the best in my opinions just because it does so much with the character at the same time. Not only does it feature a wide cast with like some smaller scale villains and stuff like that kind of thrown into the mix, but the end of the story especially really emphasizes why Batman sticks to his moral code so strictly. And seeing Jason Todd kind of come back for the first time and the interesting parallels that he kind of poses as a villain just makes for an incredibly interesting dynamic. And you know, both of them obviously make some really good points kind of in the climax of the series there, but even everything leading up to the climax is just really solid storytelling. It does have different art throughout the whole series, especially if you read this version here, but I mean, it's all pretty solid. Like, I have very few bad things to say about Under the Red Hood. So not only is it an essential read for Batman as far as like his timeline goes, I do think I talked about it in my How to Read Batman video from forever ago, but it's just a great story in general. And next up on the list is going to be Batman The Long Halloween. Now, this is a great, like, early days Batman story. Supposedly Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson's The Batman is gonna pull heavily from this. And I do think that's an incredibly strong thing. It is not an origin story, but it's still early days Batman. There's no Robin yet, but he's still got quite a few villains in his rogues gallery. And it's just an all-around super solid detective story. And the movies have really kind of yet to explore the detective side of Batman, and so utilizing a story like Long Halloween is a great idea in my opinion. This story alone has such good action and such a good mystery, and everything about it is just super solid. Cannot recommend this enough. The sequel, Dark Victory, does introduce Robin, and it is still pretty good, but many people will probably tell you that Long Halloween is the stronger of the two, and I can definitely see where they're coming from. Now, next up on the list is gonna be Batman Arkham Asylum, a serious house on serious Earth. And this one is by Grant Morrison and illustrated by Dave McKean, and this is actually a really solid story. The original Arkham Asylum video game is inspired by this novel, and it makes sense why they went with a story like this. Not only does it feature like a lot of Batman villains and go into some details on like their individual psyches, but it also takes a great look at Batman's personal life and his own issues and mental issues and stuff like that as well. This is really the first one to kind of drive home the point that Batman also belongs in Arkham Asylum, and so if you like that idea, then this is the story that it came from. Now, Dave McKean's art, for as beautiful as I find it, is not going to be for everyone, so that is going to be something to consider, but the entire story is just very dark, very mature, and does a lot to explore Batman in such a short amount of time. This is the only book. There is another Arkham Asylum book out there by Dan Slott that has nothing to do with this one, really. But if you read this one, it's just a fantastic and truly phenomenal story. Cannot recommend it enough. Now, next up on the list, I'm hoping y'all are a bit more unfamiliar with, but that'll be Dark Knight, a true Batman story, and that's Knight with an N. And I believe I've talked about this book before on the channel. It is easily one of my favorite Batman stories yet. It is written and inspired by the true life events of Paul Dini, who worked on the original animated series. And so it's just really interesting to see how Dini uses Batman and his supporting cast to overcome one of the most tragic events in his life. Essentially, after getting mugged, Dini really kind of sinks into himself, and the story really focuses greatly on healing in more ways than just physically. And what's also great about it is it shows the impact that Batman can have on people in the real world, despite being a fictional character himself. And so it is a very different and far more unconventional Batman story, but it is also one of the best that I can recommend to you guys. Now, next up is going to be Batman Year One. This is arguably the best Batman origin story, and isn't even quite an origin story. Batman Begins does pull heavily from this series, and you can definitely tell. But it's actually more of a Jim Gordon story than it is a Batman one. But essentially it covers the Wayne deaths and goes into Bruce Wayne coming back after being gone for several years, and Jim Gordon's just arriving in Gotham. And so you really get the sense that it's very early days Batman. You're seeing him just starting out. You see him make mistakes. You see why he chooses to become a bat and so on. Even as of current canon, with the relaunch of the New 52 and all that, Scott Snyder in Zero Year still incorporated many elements from Batman Year One. So if you want a bit more modern version of this story, you can read Zero Year. It's still way different, but it does incorporate certain elements from this at the same time. But personally, I do think this one still holds up quite nicely, and it is much shorter, so if you like Frank Miller's Batman especially, then that'll be the one you'll want to go for. Now, next up is going to be the War of Jokes and Riddles. Now, this is the variant cover here. This is not at all what the series looks like. I just happen to have it all in single issues. And I guess say what you will about Tom King's run, everyone seems to have their own opinion on it, but it's pretty hard to deny that War of Jokes and Riddles is easily one of the high points of his whole run. Once again, it is kind of an early days Batman type story. The whole thing takes place in flashback, and you see a war between Riddler and Joker, with Batman and all the other citizens of Gotham, good or bad, kind of caught in the middle of that. And the series does offer like a great look at Joker and Riddler themselves respectively. It does a lot of kind of cool, unique things with each of them that are welcome ideas and changes, and especially with the Batman Joker scene at the end, like, I just thought that was a pretty solid idea myself. Personally, I would recommend everything King did up to issue 50, and while I continued to enjoy it after that, most people can agree that it was really solid up until the wedding issue, and then after that is when a lot of opinions kind of change. So as much as I like King's whole run, most people would probably tell you to stop at 50, but War of Jokes and Riddles is definitely gonna be the highlight of his whole run, like hands down. And then next up we have Death of the Family by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. Now, Death in the Family is a very important story to Batman's history overall, as it's the one that actually killed off Jason Todd. But Death of the Family is a really great, like, modern, just kind of Batman horror story. And it does a lot of good stuff with Batman and Joker themselves. And it's definitely one of the more extreme Joker stories as well. Like, he goes really hard in this one. But for as much as people would probably consider War of Jokes and Riddles to be King's biggest arc, this is arguably Snyder's biggest arc as well. Granted, Court of Owls does come pretty close, and that one is still fantastic, but personally I did prefer Death of the Family, and so that's the one I'm giving y'all today. But the entire story is great. I do recommend Court of Owls still. I just feel like Death of the Family really drives home kind of the horror elements that Snyder is great at writing. And so if you need like a modern Batman story that'll terrify you and also has like a lot of kind of symbolic depth, especially with his relationship with the Joker, then that'll be a great one for you. Now, as the runner-up on this list, we have Batman Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader. Now, I love Neil Gaiman's work, and like especially through his stuff with like Sandman, but something about Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader just blew me away. It's only 2 issues. If you buy the collected edition, it comes with a reprint of some older issues. But in just 2 issues alone, Gaiman tells one of the best Batman stories I can possibly think of. It breaks down the character in ways that have just never been done before, in my opinion, and it features an incredibly wide cast. As far as the story itself goes, it kind of focuses on Batman as he watches his own funeral, and everyone's telling a different story as to how he died. And you know, some of them are happy, most of them are tragic, but it really drives home the idea that Batman is one of the ultimate heroes just in all of comics, not just the DC universe. And so it's a really, really solid story in my opinion, and I'm sure not a lot of people have heard of it. So if you want something that's super easy and quick to read, and also just one of the highest quality you can think of, then I would definitely recommend Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader. And then last but not least, we have Batman Heart of Hush. Now, I love this story like so much. It's arguably not one of the best Batman stories of all time, but it's such a strong story in the process. It does a great job of showing kind of like how close Bruce Wayne came to being Hush, given the two's very similar background. But this goes very heavy into Hush's origin. It is a phenomenal Batman and Catwoman story. So if you really like the two of them together, then I cannot recommend this enough. Like, this is a must read for any fan of Batman and Catwoman. That said, it's also written by Paul Dini, and the whole arc just has this great charm that the animated series always had, and so there is a little bit of like nostalgia in there as well. Dustin Nguyen's art really rounds everything out. I love his stuff, from his painted covers to his penciled interiors. And it's also a bit more of an unconventional Batman story as well. A lot of people tend to overlook it. A lot of people don't like Hush in general. I would say that this story could easily change your mind. It's that good. But it also doesn't feel like it's, trying to be anything it's not. It knows it's not doing anything too earth-shattering with Batman, but it's such a comfortable, just simple, great Batman story. It also offers a really kind of scary Batman moment, and definitely shows why despite the fact that he doesn't kill, criminals in Gotham are still very afraid of him. So as much as there are stronger Batman stories out there, arguably, I definitely feel as though this one is worth your time, and it's definitely kind of an overlooked gem in Batman's many years of history. But that is everything I have for you guys today. Hope y'all enjoyed this video. Let me know what y'all's top 10 Batman stories are down in the comments section below. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, and I will see you guys again next week.